What's up guys, Lon here from Android Authority, and welcome back to another episode of Camera 360. On this show, we attempt to break down a smartphone camera in about 3 minutes time. We're gonna give you the gist of everything that you need to know while keeping everything short and sweet. We're gonna talk about the camera app, its features, and of course the image quality. Today's smartphone is the LG G8, so let's go ahead and dive right in. Before we get started, let's quickly go over the camera specs. The LG G8 has a 12 megapixel primary shooter at f1.5 with optical image stabilization and a 16 megapixel wide angle secondary lens. The front facing shooter is 8 megapixels and is also paired with a 3D time of flight sensor. Moving right along, the LG G8 has a pretty standard camera app. The shutter button is on the bottom and is flanked by a video recording button and image preview. Above these, you've got a rotating set of shooting modes to pick from with a bunch of extra ones under the More tab. The camera settings can be accessed in the top left, and a few other settings are lined along the top that will change depending on which mode you're in. You can switch between the modes on the bottom by swiping left or right. Some camera apps usually let you switch modes by swiping on the viewfinder as well, but the LG G8 doesn't do that. Instead, swiping on the viewfinder regardless of direction simply flips between the front and rear cameras. It would have been nice if swiping left or right was reserved for switching camera modes, but minor complaint aside, the app works smoothly. Generally, most smartphone cameras tend to perform well in daylight conditions, but in the case of the LG G8, the camera had quite a few issues. It sometimes was a little off with white balance in certain scenes, and with shots leaning towards a very blue or cold color cast, as you can see in a couple of these examples here. Exposure is usually pretty spot on and photos are crisp, but shadows are a little darker than we'd like even with auto HDR turned on. HDR is something we rely on fairly often with smartphone cameras, but the G8's HDR processing could use some work. You can still wind up with shots that have a lot of overexposed highlights, and darker areas are underexposed, giving you a lot less detail than you might expect. Color reproduction from the LG G8 is vibrant, but they look a tad artificial and overprocessed. If the white balance is right, the shots still look pretty attractive, but if the white balance is off, well, then you just get an extremely blue looking image. The LG G8 does its best with capturing detail when there's plenty of light. You can still see a lot of texture and detail in the print of these book pages, and if you take a closer look at these meat kebabs, it retains a lot of detail on the chili flakes. Low light shots do generally look quite nice with fairly good exposure, and colors remain vibrant. It also seems like the LG G8 favors a much warmer white balance in darker situations. Again, you'll really only spot problems like softening and motion blur when you look closer, but the results are good given the circumstances. The LG G8 won't knock your socks off with its selfie photos, but is capable of grabbing good shots with natural colors, good skin tones, and exposure. LG's beautification features are on by default, and while you can turn them off, you still get some amount of skin softening regardless. On the video side of things, it's great being able to record 4K at 60 FPS, which is something that still isn't available on every flagship. The 60 FPS makes for a much smoother looking video, but you will be sacrificing image stabilization when shooting at these higher settings, which is the biggest downside. Because of that, you'll get a lot of jitters and shakes unless you get some sort of stabilizer like a gimbal. Overall, the LG G8 produces great imagery but trails behind some of its competition, giving it a total score of 7.4 out of 10. If you want to find out why, make sure to check out the written version linked in the description below, which covers the camera much more in depth and provides a more detailed breakdown of the overall score. If you want to see the full resolution images for yourself, we'll also have that linked below as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next episode of Camera 360.